This is a guide to the new workflow update in Rooms+Boundaries Studio. So I'll start with rooms first. So to add a room, go right click, 3D object and click boundary. So you can see a boundary spawns down here. Now the great thing about this asset is everything is stored in the hierarchy. So you can see all the nodes are here and they're stored in the hierarchy there, and you can move them like normal game objects. And you can change their heights, you can change their thicknesses, so you can do all that. Now if I go up to boundary, you can see there's a few tabs here. You've got the general tab for all the general data, you've got rooms for enabling rooms, and you've got prefabs for spawning prefabs along the edges of the boundary. You have generate for generating boundary around objects, and you've got settings as well for the general settings. So I'm going to go back to the general tab and I'm going to click reset to reset it to a 2x2 square, and I'm going to go to rooms and enable rooms. So now we've got mesh renderers on each node, and I'm going to go back to general and enable the floor and the ceiling. So you can see it's completely white at the moment, so I'm going to go back to the rooms tab and go and select the materials. So in terms of the wall material, let's search wall material, add that, the floor, and the ceiling. Now that I've done that, I can click override materials, and now we have a little room. Now to make this room a bit bigger, I can go back to general, and to do this really easily, I can go to the height and I can set it to a height and go reset, or I can go add it to the height that I want. So now I'm going to click on the nodes and I'm going to extend them out a bit to make the room a little bit bigger. Great, so now I have a room. So now to add more nodes, there's 3 ways to do that. You can click on a node and just duplicate it as if it's a game object, and then you can add nodes that way. Or if you select a node and hold down Control, then you can click on it and it will spawn where it hits the terrain or a collider. And the great thing about adding it this way is if you hold down Control, you can press Shift and it changes which orientation. So if you do this, you can add it to the left. And then if you hold down Shift, you can see it changes, and then you can add it to the right now. And then the last way of adding new nodes is by extruding. I'm going to get this boundary, I'm going to move it up so it doesn't cut through things, and I'm going to click on a wall and I'm going to click extrude, and then that extrudes it out that way. So I'm going to make a little room here. I'm going to extrude those out. So now I've got this little U shape. Let's say I want to combine these two. I click one here and I click one here by holding Shift, and then go Control and M, and then it merges them together and it adds a little gap in the middle. So if we go in, we have a boundary with a little thing in the middle here to join them. So let's configure this room a little bit. So at the moment it looks like this. What I can do is I can add a thickness. I can do that by dragging out this by here, or I can even click on a node and then manually change the thickness value here. But if I want to do it for all of them, I just got to click thickness, change it to something like 3 and go reset, and it resets all thicknesses. You can see I've got this little gap in here. So what I can do is I can click enable corners and it fills in the corners of all the sides. And I can also change the thickness of the floors and the ceilings. So if I click the ceiling, and over here we've got the thickness, and I can bring that up. So now the ceiling has more thickness. And now if I go back to the boundary here, you can see I've got 2 buttons here. I'm going to click walls to top, and then that brings the walls to the very top, so it's in line with the ceiling. And let's suppose I click on a wall and I want to change its height. So I'll just change its height so it's a little bit like this. And you can see that's a bit slanted. And inside you can see it looks like that now. If I want the ceiling to have a flat base, I can click on the ceiling and click flat base, and it makes sure the top of the ceiling is completely flat. So let's say I want to add a window. Well, all I got to do is click one of the walls, hold down Control and click and drag, and then you can make a window on the wall. And of course it looks a bit better when you add some thickness, so I'm going to bring this back, and now we have a window here. And if you drag the middle, then you can drag where the window is, and you can drag these sides as well, and you can change the vertices. And if you double click any of them, then it will delete it, and you've got this ball in the middle. If you click on it, then you can add more. And of course you can add as many as you want. So you can add some more up here, and you can see all the triangles reconfigure themselves. And if I want to really quickly remove the holes, I just got to double click the middle of the hole, and then it gets removed. And over here you have hole vertices, and so if I bump that up to something like 30, then the hole that I'm going to create now is going to be a circle. And then I'm going to double click here to remove it, or I can go remove hole down here. Now, if I go over to here, I can add a shape in here. So I can go a centered square, and if I go add, you can see it adds a square over the entire wall. I go remove, let's decrease the radius a little bit so it doesn't cover the whole thing. And now I've got a square which is right in the middle. I go remove, and I can also add a centered circle as well, and let's go add, and it adds a circle like that. If I increase the radius to the max, which is 499, and go add, then it creates a circle that goes right to the edges. But let's say I want to add a regular circle, I'll just go regular circle and go add, and then it adds a regular circle in there. You can see there's lots of triangles being printed on the screen right now, and this can cause a bit of lag if you're working with a lot of vertices. So you can click performance mode, and that will remove all the unnecessary handles from your wall. And of course you can change the material by changing the whole material over here. And if you go and click the drop down, you can change all the values from the inspector as well, including the offset. So now let's add holes in the floor. So to do that, you can click on the ceiling or the floor, hold down Control and click and drag, and then you can add a hole just like that. And if you click on it, then of course you can change the thickness and it looks a little bit better. I can bring it all the way down to the water. Now we can understand what's going on here if I click the main boundary. So this is the boundary over the entire thing. If I go to rooms, you can see that we've got two included boundaries. We've got boundary hole, and boundary hole is this one here. And then we have boundary, and boundary is this one here. Which means if I were to go into the nodes of this new boundary and I move it, you can see that it configures itself to the original boundary. So I can rename them. So this one is boundary hole at the moment, so I can change that to whatever this one is. So I'm going to change it to like perimeter. And then this one here is I'm going to change this one to the hole. So now let's click on our floor, go to the right, and we can see we've got our included boundaries. We've got the perimeter boundary, which is this one, and the hole boundary, which is that one. So the hole boundary, I can go fill, and it fills it up. I can go skip, and it just skips it completely. And because these are just regular boundaries, what you can do is, like for this one, is I can just disable rooms and disable the visible aspect, and there we go. Now it's just a hole at the top and the bottom. And you can see we've got a hole at the ceiling and a hole on the floor. So if I click the ceiling and I'm like, oh, I don't want it to fill in the ceiling anymore, I just go skip and it skips the ceiling completely, or alternatively I can just fill it in and it fills in. So if I were to go to our hole and delete it, then it gets removed. And of course, if I go and click on our floor here, and I can change the whole vertices to like something like 30, and go click and drag, and now it creates a circle with 30 vertices. And I can select down the new one that's created, and you can see all the nodes that have been created here. And of course, you can remove any of them, and it will change the whole. So let's delete both of them, and let's walk through the inspector here. So for general, you've got reconfigure, that just does a hard reset and goes through everything and reconfigures it. Resets it to a 2x2 square. You got disable and enable, which disables all the colliders and all of the mesh renderers. You've got height, so you can just add heights and remove heights. You can change it to -2 and then decrease it again. You've got thickness, which showed before. You can change the thickness of all of the walls. You've got invert, which is useful for boundaries inside of each other. Because if you were to create a boundary, this new boundary is actually inverted. If I were to invert it, and let's go reconfigure, you can see it doesn't work. You've got snap all and clamp all. So snap all will snap all of the nodes to grid. So I'm going to go snap all. And if I were to go to the grid settings, let's go top perspective, and then we're going to go into wireframe. I'll just zoom in, then you can see that it's right on the grid line, and it's on a 1:1 ratio right now. And you have clamp all, and that will clamp all of the nodes to the grid, which I will show later on in the boundary section. You've got sync data. So what you can do is you can create a whole new boundary. And you've got this one here, and then if you drag in our bigger boundary into sync data and go confirm sync, you can see this one now has all the same data and all the same materials and all the same, tick boxes and all that. Then you have visible, which is if the handles are visible or not. You have floor, which is if you want to enable a floor or disable the floor, and ceiling, which is the same thing, and the corners, which is the edges here. If I go to the rooms, you've got the wall, floor, and ceiling material. These are the default values, so if one is missing, it will default back to them. You've got the wall scale, which you can change the scale of the material on the wall, and you've got the floor scale and the ceiling. You can go unlock, and then you can change the X and Y independently if you want to do that. And you've got override materials, which will set all of the walls, floors, and ceilings back to these three materials here. And then you have included boundaries. So if I were to add one, and if I were to add a new boundary, and let's add it in the middle. So I'm going to bring it down and let's increase the height a bit. I need to invert it because it is a boundary inside of another boundary. And then we go over here and we drag in the new one, and we go back to general and go reconfigure. And now we have our hole down there. And to see it a bit more clearly, I'm going to turn off visible, and now we have it on the top and bottom. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So that is the room section. So let's get into boundaries. So I'm going to delete this boundary here, and I'm going to create a player boundary along this path. So to do that, I'm going to go right click 3D object and do boundary again, and I'm going to start creating. But first of all, let's increase the height. So I'm going to set to something like 10, and then let's click one of the nodes, and I'm going to drag it into the very first position, which I reckon I'll start it between the two trees right here. And all the others I'm going to delete, so it's just this one node here. And let's drag it up. And what I can do is I've got the node settings over here, and the one I want to push is clamp. So I go clamp, and then it clamps it onto the terrain. So I'm going to click the node, and then I'm going to control and click, and then I'm going to click my way around. So which one do I want? I want this one here. And then I'm going to control click, and let's bring them all the way around here. So I'm going to drag that over here, and I want to make sure they're all clamped at the moment. So I'm going to get our boundary, move it up a bit, and then down here I'm going to go clamp all, and then they all clamp to the terrain. So I'm going to click this one and go control again. And now which one do? I do this one here. Click, 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 and then let's move them around this way as well. Let's make it a little bit tighter and add a bit more in here. All right, so now that's looking good. Now I want to add one right in between. So how do I do that? What I can do is I can go into settings, and there's a button called split nodes. So if I turn that on, that means if I were to click on this one and duplicate it, then the duplicator node is right in the middle of the two. So I'm going to turn that off because I don't need it anymore. I'm going to bring this up and go clamp. So now it clamps it down. So now we have a little boundary along the path. So now I want to add some trees and rocks alongside it. So how do I do that? Well, we use the prefab section. So under here we have the prefab parent, and so let's create a new game object and let's go prefabs. So this is where the prefabs will spawn. And so I'm going to drag that in, and that's where I want. So now we come over here and we say, okay, I want to put in a scriptable object. So over here, we have our scriptable objects. So the ones that we're going to do is trees and rocks. And of course, to create it, you go create, rooms and boundaries, and then you go prefabs. And here you can click the drop down, and this is where you can add in a new game object for the prefab that you want to spawn. So the one I'm wanting to do is one that's already there. It's called trees and rocks. So here I've added the prefab of tree 2, which is this one, and tree 3. And I've added all these settings over here. So it's basically going to pick a random object from this list. So let's go to prefabs, and I'm going to drag in the trees and rocks one, and let's go preview, and it will preview where they will spawn alongside it. So you can see that's a little bit close together. So instead I'm going to increase the spawn distance. I'm going to increase it to maybe like 5. So now that's the maximum. So it spawns between, let's say between 2 and 5. The blue dots, I like where the positions are, and I'm going to click spawn. and then it spawns them onto the scene. So you can see they're a little bit small. I can probably pack them a little bit closer together. So let's do that. Preview and spawn again. There we go. So now they're a little bit closer together, and they are quite small. So I'm going to increase it a bit. So to increase the sizes of them, I'll just go back to here and let's close this up and let's go show default settings. So I can change the default setting of the prefab to spawn, but I want all of them to be different objects. The height offset, is how high they spawn on the boundary. You got the minimum distance, like what is the minimum distance that they need to spawn from each other. You got rotation type and scale type. I can set them to have a random rotation if I want to, and I've got the scale type. So this is the one that I'm going to be looking at. So for the scale type, I'm going to say I want a uniform scale. Let's say the minimum scale is something like 3 and 5 and go apply to all. And if I go through, you can see that 3 and 5 is now applied to all of them. So let's go back to our boundary and let's go clear and preview and spawn. And so now the trees and the rocks are a little bit bigger. So if we turn off visibility, you can see that we've added some prefabs alongside the boundary. So the last thing you can do is you can generate boundaries. And to do that, you can either click the generate menu in here and it'll pop up there, or you can go to tools, rooms and boundaries and click generate. So there's two ways of getting there. So it says select scene objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the objects which have the mesh renderer component so that it does it right. So I'm going to select all of these and maybe remove the top ones, and let's go preview, and you can see a previewed boundary. You can also change the offset. Let's make a little bit of an offset of like 0.5, and then we go generate. And that will generate a boundary. Of course, this boundary here isn't visible at the moment, but there we go. And we have now generated the boundary. So let's say I want to make a fence alongside this boundary. What can I do there? Well, first of all, you can see that the balls are currently underneath the terrain. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lift all of them up, and then I want to clamp all of them to the terrain. So now I'm going to make a fence around them. So let's go prefabs. And now I don't want to spawn trees and rocks anymore. I want to spawn the fence posts. And the change I'm going to make here is I'm going to click spawn at nodes, preview. And now you can see the blue balls are now at every single node rather than spreading across the edge of the boundary. So I'm going to go spawn at nodes and go spawn prefabs, and it adds a fence along there. And now let's connect the fence up by going into our connector parent, and let's go over here, create empty and go connectors. Let's drag over the connectors and then this pops up, and here I'm going to click plus, and what is the one I want to add? I'm going to lock this up. I want to add the fence. So I'm going to add that and then go connect. And you can see it connects them through the entire thing. Of course, it's a little bit off at the moment. So I'm going to get the Z scale multiplier and decrease it by, to like 4.8 or something and go connect. Now it's the right length, and let's get to our height and let's decrease it. So maybe between 0.6 and 0.7 and go connect. And there we go. Now we have a fence around the boundary. And of course, let's go back to the boundary and let's go visible. And we have just spawned a fence around these runes here. And then lastly, you have the settings where you can click execute at runtime. So you can have the boundary automatically update itself at runtime if you like. You have occlude handles, which is, if it's visible and this is turned off, then they will be see-through. You have display the edges, which will display the edges, especially when you create holes. So it depends if you want to see the triangles or not. So you got snap to grid. That's if you click on one, and then if you hold down control, then it will snap it to grid, and to spawn one, you can click space. So there's that split nodes, which is where you click on a node, and if you duplicate it, it will split it right in the middle. You've got shift and scroll, which is where if you click on a node and shift and scroll, you can change the height like that. Or if you change it to thickness, then you can change the thickness by doing that. Layer mask, which is for all the raycasts. So if you don't want it to go through everything, then you can select it there. You have the wall color, so you can change it to something like blue, and then it changes the wall color to blue, and you've got all the other colors. You have node size, so if I were to increase the node size, you can see that the nodes here become a lot bigger. Yeah, so that's a quick overview of Rooms and Boundaries Studio. Feel free to check it out in the description.